Well, good afternoon, all. My name is Primrose Igonor. I want to firstly start by apologizing for not being able to present my session promoting diversity and inclusion through course content due to technical difficulties. I'm going to do that today, and I will very shortly share my slides. Just as a way of introduction, Primrose Igonor, Director of the Connection Center, Belonging and Equity at Marion Technical College. So let me go ahead and share my screen, which will hopefully work. There we go. Okay, I hope everybody is able to see my screen. It does show me that I am sharing, and I just want to put it in slide format. By all means, if you have any questions following this presentation, I will make sure to put my email address in chat and we can follow through. So, under normal grounds, there would be an icebreaker. I would present, and then there would be an opportunity for Q&A or discussion. And essentially, my icebreaker is to ask the question, when did you realize that you were different? And it's always interesting for me to note that a lot of people will say, yes, at some point in my life, I discovered that I was different and it did impact me. And the reason I ask this question is for us to just put ourselves in the mindset of people that are different, people that feel like they don't belong, like they're not welcome. How then, because we can empathize with that feeling, how then can we in our jobs, in our personal relationships, ensure that when those individuals are around us, they don't feel that way? So I will use myself as an example. I was born in Uganda, grew up in South Africa, and I've been in the States for 7 years. And when my family moved to South Africa because of issues with Idi Amin, we moved to a country, little country called the Mountain Kingdom in South Africa, Lesotho. And because my parents were expatriates, we found ourselves in the expatriate scene, which was mainly comprised of white individuals. So white people from either South Africa, which surrounds Lesotho, or from all over the world. And so the school that we went to was a private school. All our teachers were white. And the first thing they say to my siblings and I is, can you tell us your English names? Because at that point we had our Ugandan names. And at that age, obviously, I was 9. I didn't really think much of it. And hence I became Primrose. But as I hit my 20s and 30s, I started to question that because there was a realization that my Ugandan name, Kentwiga, which means giraffe, was given to me by my parents for a special reason. So in a lot of African cultures, people decide on their children's names based on circumstances happening around them. I also later found out that I was named after a medical healer, a woman who operated in the 1950s. So a woman way beyond her time, way ahead of her time, actually. And so there was a reason that name was given to me. And so for me, I guess that was when I realized that I was different. So on to the presentation. Number one, why does diverse representation even matter? There's a couple of notes that I've put out there in my on my slide, so make sure to look at that. Uh, it's so important for us to include content that is meaningful and relevant. And so when we know our students' cultural, social backgrounds, we're able to include that information. Because what happens is those students will then experience a sense of belonging, which will then lead to motivation and ultimately to their success. So we have to take seriously the task of conveying the message that all our students have a place in their field of study as well as in the classroom. When students see themselves reflect to make connections to their own lives, they will therefore be more motivated to learn and hence improve in the course. So when we talk about increases in persistence, retention, and ultimately graduation, a lot has to do with a sense of belonging. So we need to contextualize that learning through analogies that are relevant to our students, which then allows any new content to stick and be absorbed and organized. Another thing I like to say is that when we do that, we are also validating different ways of knowing and different ways of being. Excuse me. So all this kind of relates to the whole term of known as cultural capital. Representation matters in terms of the content and the visibility of role models. So when students have the opportunity to see and hear from individuals who can serve as potential role models in their field of study, they're encouraged to follow the same path. And I'm going to need to take a very quick break, get some water, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully no more coughing fits. So as I was saying, when students see uh, people and individuals that look like them and they see them as potential role models, they're encouraged to follow the same path. So I always ask at this point, who are your guest speakers? Who are the individuals represented in videos that you show in class? These things are all very important. So when it comes to looking at course content, I'd like us to address three things: topics addressed, examples used, and readings assigned. Course content plays a huge role in creating an inclusive classroom environment. So what topics are you choosing to focus on? For example, when I teach a sociology introductory course, I tend to focus on poverty in greater detail because I know a lot of our students have come from those type of environments. We have a lot of first generational students. And so they kind of get involved and they can share their experiences. Excuse me. The examples used. Do examples portray individuals from a particular identity group, i.e., are they all only heterosexual, married, Christian, in stereotypical occupations or situations? Be wary of that. On the other hand, when bringing in diverse perspectives, be careful to avoid tokenizing marginalized perspectives by only including some here and there. Strive to make a multiplicity of viewpoints central to the course, and you want to be intentional in this. And then finally, when it comes to readings assigned, if most of the readings present dominant perspectives, find ways to open up the curriculum to include multiple perspectives, including ones that are usually marginalized. For example, in an English Lit course, instead of focusing solely on Shakespeare, perhaps include the works of Toni Morrison. So again, you have to be intentional right from the beginning and not just insert things willy-nilly. And when we do that, we are able to incorporate more diverse voices within the classroom. And these voices and perspectives will convey messages about who belongs within a field of study, who has legitimacy when speaking about certain subject matters, how is knowledge produced, and what knowledge matters. So a lot of times people will say, but what about neutral course content? Let's say math and science. A lot of people would say that has nothing to do with belonging and inclusion. But I want to caution you about the story of a math instructor who was teaching a class, and a student made a throwaway comment that irrational numbers must all be female. and the pandemonium that ensued after that. This highlighted how unprepared the instructor felt because he had always thought that he did not need to prepare himself for such a situation because he was teaching a math class and numbers and are not controversial. So it behooves everyone to prepare themselves. Related to that, I always talk about make yourself human to your students. Even if you're teaching math or science, let them know about struggles you might have had, how you got to college. And when you do that, you allow them into your life. And then that allows them to be able to share about themselves. Have discussions about barriers to inclusion in terms of the course content. This helps you make visible to students why a certain field lacks diverse voices and encourages the students to think critically about the course content they encounter. For instance, watching the movie Hidden Figures, I never knew that Black female mathematicians worked at NASA. Also, as I constantly tell my students, all knowledge is contestable. That then gives them permission to ask questions, disagree, talk about different perspectives, which is what we want our students to do, is to be thinking critically. Another way you can deal with neutral course content is by including diverse student voices in small group work. So think about things like the think, pair, share exercise. Uh, when we provide more opportunities to students to engage with each other, it allows them to think through multiple viewpoints. Also, when we incorporate student voices into the classroom, it signals to them that they have valuable contributions to make. So, how do we help students engage with diverse materials? The inclusion of diverse perspectives alone will not automatically mean that students know how to intentionally step outside of their own beliefs, attitudes, and knowledge to make room for someone else's. Students often struggle when they encounter challenges to their own ways of knowing. So, we as instructors can model intellectual debate and standards of evidence in the same way we can model pushing back and be explicit about doing so. Pushing back teaches students how to disagree in the classroom in a respectful manner. Another way that you can help students engage with diverse materials is by including various rubrics, grading rubrics in your grading structure. So, for instance, intercultural competence refers to an individual's capacity to respectfully engage and communicate with others so that they have the benefit of other people's cultural perspectives. So, if you were to include a rubric in this regard, that would allow you to see how well your students are doing with regards to intercultural competence. And related to that is the whole diversity rubric, great rubric that was developed by the AACNU, Association of American Colleges and Universities. That specific rubric identifies the knowledge, skills, and attitudes individuals must develop, including cultural self awareness, empathy, and openness on their path to intercultural competence. So we have nursing programs, we have physical therapy programs, we have business programs, and these aspects of intercultural competence can play a huge role, especially when I think about a nursing position. So when we as instructors embed this skill set explicitly into our curriculum, assignments, and activities, it allows us to encourage our own development of intercultural competence. This can help guide students in their development of their knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to meaningfully engage with diverse perspectives in the classroom. So I'm proud to say that we use this rubric at Marion Technical College in various courses. Uh, this particular rubric deals with intercultural competence. Bear in mind that DEI is more than just race. So look for rubrics that are going to focus on other dimensions of uh, diversity, including sexual orientation, religion, etc. A very important question to ask is, are your classrooms neutral spaces? Do your classrooms help build a sense of community? So, whether it's neutral or not in your mind, your class is a web of power relationships. You, as the instructor, are exercising power. You are giving directions, you are assessing students, you're the one sequencing the material, you're the one calling on so and so rather than someone else. So, rethinking how you create the community of learners is an important part that is still culturally responsive, even if you're not talking about cultural or power dynamics in your content. So, again, something for neutral courses to consider. Also, tell students that you make mistakes and ask them to hold you accountable as you do yourself and them. Normalize mistakes, as doing so gives them permission to make mistakes too and be okay with it. I am well known for saying, when I know better, I do better. I don't struggle to say, I made a mistake, I am sorry, and I'm going to try my best not to make the same mistake. If you teach content with no attempt to involve students, no attempt to check for their understanding, no effort for them to raise questions or for you to answer them, then you are using your power in a relatively blind and authoritarian and potentially haphazard or arbitrary way. So think about that, creating multiple access points for students to ask questions. Also, step outside the assumptions that you have learned about your own discipline. A very good question is, who is your course convenient for? So this can mean acknowledging that our disciplines are often founded in value systems and cultural beliefs that may oppress and denigrate other cultural ways of knowing and experiencing the world. Moreover, these values and beliefs may not be shared by all instructors or students in the discipline. I always use the example studying psychology from a Western perspective when I was in South Africa. So all our textbooks, all the tests that we used were from the developed world, and yet we lived in the developing world. And so to start to ask ourselves, but who are the theorists in Africa that we can look to? Who are the psychologists practicing that can tell us about indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous ways of being? So constantly questioning yourself. So in summary, how do we become inclusive instructors? Number one, we look at selection. Remember that it helps to have some background information about your students before selecting your course materials. I don't know about your campuses, but we have Power Campus, we have our advisors, so you can always touch base with them, find out this information as per the slide. What is the age of your students? What is their sexual orientation? Are there any with disabilities? What is their race? What is their gender? Secondly, student interactions. Make your students feel welcome and that they belong by selecting content that represents their experiences. This means that you have to get to know your students. So, yes, you will have prior knowledge, but as you are teaching, you are getting to know your students, and that should even help you add more relative content. And very importantly, intentionality. You have to be intentional, not just haphazard or as an afterthought, which I myself am guilty of. So we want to start right at the beginning to be intentionally including specific course content, having specific guest speakers. Relate to that, I found out at another presentation that I did, add an inclusive excellence statement in your syllabus. I have an example of that one of the participants of that conference sent to me. So if anybody's interested in that, again, I will provide you with my email address. So in conclusion, reflection is a huge piece, self-reflection. Practice actively disrupting your biases in your beliefs and behaviors. You know, I also just learned this at a conference I attended earlier today. Why do we talk about terminal degrees? And yet we always want to talk about lifelong learning. So get into that mindset. I am always learning. The whole concept of being woke, people have challenged that. We're constantly awakening. We can't suddenly be woke. we haven't, lived so long to say we are woke and we know everything. Absolutely not. We're constantly awakening. So this self-reflection is ongoing work, includes more reading, attending workshops, learning more about different experiences, and incorporating this info into your teaching. Do the awkward and comfortable and sometimes painful work of unpacking your biases. Excuse me. And the ways that this they inform your teaching. Include your excuse me. Include your preferred pronouns in your email signature is another way to make your students feel welcome and like they belong. In conclusion, I just want to share this example of teaching first generation students for the first time. Prior to coming to the United States, I thought that the majority of people that would be considered first generation would be people of color. So when I started teaching at my college, which is in a predominantly white rural area, I said, yes, race might be an issue. I mean, in the first 3 years of teaching, I did not have a single student of color. And when it got to the point that I had to deal with race, I said, well, okay, race is going to be an issue, but my majority of my students are white. Therefore, they're like myself, they look at the world through a middle class lens, which is the way I was raised. And imagine my surprise when I found the majority were not middle class. And very quickly, I had to change the way I was presenting information, the way I was presenting myself to my students. And so I had to really go back into my content, think about the examples that I was using in order to engage my students. And I'm sorry, I have been coughing through this presentation. My nose is stuffy. So what I'm going to do now is just stop sharing my screen and go into chat and share my email address. So please do reach out to me if you have any questions. I'd be more than happy to set up a Zoom meeting, give you more examples because this was just a very quick summary of my presentation. If there was people involved in the discussion, of course, it would be much longer. Thank you very much. Also, thank you to the organizers of this great conference guide. Goodbye.